She was a whisper in a world of shouts, a scalpel in an arsenal of hammers. He was the hammer. He saw a civilian geologist, another cog in the vast military machine he commanded. The mountain, however, saw something else entirely. It felt her listening to its ancient, stony heart. By the time the general understood the chasm between his perception and reality, it was too late to do anything but bear witness as she taught the mountain a new and terrible song, a song that would save them all. The silence inside Forward Operating Base Ethelgard was a lie. It was a thin veneer stretched taut over a bedrock of constant grinding tension. Here, buried 2,000 feet beneath the jagged peaks of the Tartarus Range, the air itself felt compressed, heavy with the weight of rock, and the unspoken fear of the men and women who lived within it. The recycled atmosphere carried the metallic tang of ozone from the server farms and the faint, earthy scent of damp concrete, a constant reminder of their subterranean existence. Every sound was magnified, every footstep on the grated metal floors a small report in the oppressive quiet. This was a place of listening, a steel and wire ear pressed against the chest of an enemy nation, and the silence was merely the act of holding its breath. Dr. Eris Thorne preferred the lie. The manufactured quiet allowed her to hear the truth, which was a low, resonant hum that vibrated up through the soles of her worn boots. It was a frequency just below the threshold of conscious hearing for most. But for her, it was a voice. The mountain was always speaking, a slow, deep baritone of geological time, of tectonic stress and crystalline complaint. She sat before a holographic display, a cascade of emerald and sapphire light that painted her unassuming features in its glow. Her fingers, long and nimble, moved with an economy that bordered on stillness, coaxing data streams from a dozen different sensors buried miles deep in the surrounding rock. The display showed topographical maps layered with seismic velocity models, gravimetric anomalies, and piezoelectric field fluctuations. To the soldiers who occasionally glanced her way, it was an incomprehensible storm of data. To Eris, it was a conversation. She was an anomaly in this place of rigid uniformity. While everyone else wore the drab olive and muted gray of standard-issue fatigues, she wore simple black cargo pants and a dark gray utility shirt, whose sleeves were rolled up to her forearms. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot, and her face, pale from a lack of sunlight, was a mask of focused neutrality. She held no rank, wore no insignia, and moved through the command center with the quiet unobtrusiveness of a maintenance drone. She was listed on the official manifest as a civilian consultant, a geophysicist attached to the Strategic Monitoring Division, a specialist, an egghead. The soldiers gave her a wide berth, their deference born not of respect, but of a fundamental misunderstanding of her purpose. She was other. The truth of the mountain was this: for the past 72 hours, its voice had changed. A new rhythm had entered the ancient chorus. It was subtle, a harmonic undertone that did not belong. It was structured, artificial. It spoke of meticulous engineering and immense power. Her sensors, scattered across a 100-mile radius, were picking up patterned micro-vibrations, waves so faint they were lost in the background noise to any but the most sensitive instruments and the most attuned mind. She was tracing their origins, mapping the way they propagated through the granite and schist, feeling them out like a safecracker, listening for the fall of tumblers. The enemy, burrowed into a sister mountain 10 miles to the north, was doing something new, something clever, and the mountain was telling her all about it. The doors to the command center hissed open with a blast of pressurized air, shattering the fragile quiet. General Marcus Valerius entered as if he were breaching a hostile fortification. He was a large man, made larger by the crisp, perfectly tailored uniform that seemed shrink-wrapped to his powerful frame. His chest was a billboard of military achievement, a constellation of ribbons and badges that declared his importance. His voice, when it came, was a blunt instrument designed to hammer home his authority. "Status report!" he boomed, his gaze sweeping the room, not to gather information, but to ensure all eyes were on him. He was a creature of presence, a man who believed leadership was a performance and volume a measure of conviction. The hum of the servers seemed to diminish in his wake, the very air recoiling from his force of personality. Major Kalen Reed, the base's signals intelligence chief, snapped to attention. He was a lean, precise man whose own competence was of a quieter, more technical nature. "All systems green, General. No change in enemy comms traffic. The array is stable. We are at 100% operational capacity." Valerius grunted, a sound of profound dissatisfaction. "Stable is not what I want to hear, Major. Stable is another word for stagnant. We are here to find a vulnerability, to crack that nut over there." He gestured vaguely at a wall-sized map that depicted the enemy complex, a red blotch of menace named Cerberus. "What is our civilian asset doing?" His attention fell on Aris. It was a heavy, dismissive gaze. He did not use her name. He did not acknowledge her as a person. She was an asset, a tool, and one he clearly held in low esteem. He strode over to her station, his polished boots clicking sharply on the floor. He loomed behind her, radiating impatience and a faint scent of expensive cologne that was jarring in the sterile environment. "Well, Doctor," he demanded, "found any interesting pebbles? Any seismic shifts that are going to inconvenience my morning coffee?" Aris did not turn. Her eyes remained locked on the holographic display, where a new data string was resolving itself into a complex, repeating waveform. It was elegant, sinusoidal, and deeply, deeply wrong. "The background resonance has shifted, General," she said, her voice calm and even, devoid of inflection. It was the voice of someone reporting a temperature reading. "The amplitude of the 7.2 Hz frequency has increased by 0.003% over the last hour. It's a patterned increase, not natural." Valerius stared blankly at the screen. He saw meaningless squiggles of light. He understood armor penetration values, blast radiuses, and kill probabilities. He did not understand hertz or harmonic resonance. It was the language of the laboratory, not the battlefield, and he had no patience for it. "Translate that into something a soldier can understand, Doctor," he said, his tone laced with condescension. She finally turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his for the first time. Her eyes were a cool, clear gray, like polished river stones. They held no deference, no fear, only a placid, analytical depth. "They're tuning the mountain," she said. A brief, uncomprehending silence followed. Valerius's face tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. He suspected he was being mocked, but the woman's expression was so utterly neutral he couldn't be sure. "Tuning it? What in God's name does that mean? Are they planning a concert?" he scoffed. A few nervous chuckles echoed from the officers nearby. "No, General," Aris replied, turning back to her screen. "They are treating the entire lithosphere as a single, massive transducer. The granite strata here are rich in quartz. Under pressure, they generate a measurable electric field. Piezoelectricity. They aren't preparing to attack us with explosives. They're preparing to use the rock itself as the medium for their attack. Her fingers flew across the console, pulling up a new projection. It showed the FOB, a tiny blue icon, suspended in a vast, three-dimensional lattice of shimmering green lines. These are the resonant stress lines. They intersect directly with our primary foundation pylons and our communications hub. They are mapping us, and they're using the mountain's own structure to do it. Valerius stared, his jaw working silently. This was beyond his experience. It was esoteric, abstract. It sounded like science fiction. His worldview was built on concrete principles of force and counterforce. Men with guns took ground. Bombs destroyed bunkers. This talk of tuning and transducers was the babble of an academic who had never seen a real fight. "That's absurd," he declared, his voice rising. He was dismissing the data because he could not comprehend it, a common failing of men like him. "Our facility is shielded. We are impervious to any conventional or electronic attack. Cerberus is a hole in the ground full of fanatics. They are not physicists. Their methods are unconventional, but the physics are sound," Eris stated flatly. "The data is unambiguous." This was the moment the challenge was truly issued. It was a confrontation not of wills, but of paradigms. Valerius's world of established doctrine versus her world of empirical data. He felt his authority being questioned, not by a subordinate, but by a process he did not respect. He took a step closer, his shadow falling completely over her small workstation. "Your job, Doctor," he said, his voice a low, threatening growl, "is to monitor for earthquakes and tell me if this rock is going to fall on our heads. It is not to indulge in wild speculation. We have a $10 million signals intelligence suite and a battalion of trained soldiers. We will know if they're planning an attack. We will deal with it using bombs and bullets, not by listening to your rock music. Do you understand me?" Major Reed shifted uncomfortably. He had seen the data streams Eris was monitoring. While he didn't grasp the full geophysical implications, he recognized a pattern. He knew that structured, repeating signals, no matter how subtle, were never meaningless. Eris gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She did not say, "Yes, General." She did not acknowledge his rank or his tirade. She simply acknowledged that she had heard the noise he was making. Her gaze had already returned to the screen, her focus absolute. She had presented the facts. The general's inability to accept them was his problem, not hers. It was another variable to be logged and analyzed, command-level cognitive dissonance. For her, his anger was just another waveform, loud and chaotic, but ultimately predictable. She had already dismissed him and returned to her conversation with the mountain. He was irrelevant. The mountain was not. It was telling her that time was running out. Frustrated and simmering, Valerius turned away. "Major Reed, I want a full tactical drill. Scramble the response teams. I want this base on a war footing. If they're planning something, we'll be ready for it the old-fashioned way." "Yes, General," Reed said, his eyes lingering for a moment on Eris's screen before he turned to carry out the orders. The klaxons began to blare, a harsh synthetic shriek that tore through the quiet. Marines in full combat gear began to move with practiced urgency, their boots thudding on the decks. The base came alive with the familiar, frantic energy of a crisis drill. Valerius watched with satisfaction, seeing the tangible, understandable response to his command. This was strength. This was readiness. It was a comforting illusion. Eris did not flinch. The noise of the alarm, the shouting, the running feet. It was all just interference. She filtered it out, her mind focused on the silent, deadly signal that was growing stronger with every passing minute. The mountain's new song was approaching its crescendo, and no amount of men with guns would be able to stop it. The crisis did not arrive with the thunder of an explosion. It began as a whisper, a vibration so subtle it was felt in the bones before it was heard. It started in the deep, a hum that resonated with the fillings in their teeth. The lights in the command center flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a sickly amber glow as the emergency power kicked in. The floor plates began to thrum, a low, powerful oscillation that grew steadily in intensity. It wasn't the violent, chaotic shaking of an earthquake. It was a pure, sustained, and terrifyingly regular pulse. It was the 7.2 hertz frequency. "Report!" Valerius bellowed, his hands gripping the edge of a console to steady himself. "What was that? Seismic event?" A panicked voice crackled over the comms. "Negative, General. No tectonic shift detected. It's everywhere. The whole structure is vibrating." On Eris's screen, the emerald lines representing the stress lattice had turned a blazing crimson. The waveform she had been tracking was no longer a subtle undertone. It was a tidal wave of energy, perfectly tuned, perfectly targeted. "It started," she said, her voice a dead calm in the rising storm of noise and confusion. "They've activated the emitter." The general spun on her, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Emitter? What are you talking about?" "The mountain," she said, her eyes fixed on the data. "They're driving it at its resonant frequency. Our bunker is acting as a sympathetic resonator. They're shaking us apart from the inside out." As if to punctuate her words, a high-pitched screech filled the air as a hairline crack raced across the thick, reinforced concrete of the far wall. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The main hollow tank flickered and died, plunging the room into the eerie half-light of emergency strobes. Valerius's world of protocol and established tactics was fracturing as surely as the concrete around him. His instinct, honed by decades of conventional warfare, screamed for an enemy to shoot, a target to bomb. But his enemy was the very ground beneath his feet. "Engineering!" he roared into his personal comms unit. "Get me a damage report. Reinforce all primary supports. I want teams out there now." "We can't, sir," a strained voice replied. "The vibrations are too intense. The outer corridors they're compressing, and we're losing power containment on levels 3 and 4. "Get me an external comms link," Valerius commanded, turning to Major Reed. "I want to launch a retaliatory strike on Cerberus, full payload." Reed was already at his console, his face grim. "No good, General. The piezoelectric interference is off the charts. The quartz in the rock is generating a massive EM field from the stress. It's like being inside a Faraday cage 10 miles thick. We're completely deaf and dumb. Nothing gets in or out." The general stared, his authority bleeding away with every failed command. His tools, his soldiers, his bombs, his communication arrays were useless. He was a master of a game whose rules had been abruptly and completely rewritten. The shaking intensified, the pulses coming faster now, each one a physical blow that rattled the entire structure. A bank of servers tore loose from its moorings and crashed to the floor in a shower of sparks. The noise was deafening, a grinding, groaning symphony of a dying bass. Valerius's response was to shout louder, as if his voice alone could reassert order over the laws of physics. "I want every man with a tool or a weapon shoring up the walls. I want..." His voice trailed off. He had no more orders to give. His orthodoxy had failed. Brute force was a child's tantrum against the calculated, elegant violence being inflicted upon them. His entire career had been a preparation for the wrong kind of war. In the midst of the escalating chaos, Eris Thorne was an island of preternatural calm. The vibrations that shook the consoles and rattled the bulkheads were, to her, simply data points. She felt the frequency, the amplitude, the phase of each wave not as a threat, but as a variable in an equation that was rapidly solving itself in her mind. Her workstation, anchored directly to the central foundation, was vibrating violently, but her hands moved over the holographic interface with unwavering precision. She wasn't fighting the storm, she was mapping its currents. Major Reed, having exhausted every option his own training could offer, saw it. He saw the general, red-faced and impotent, shouting useless commands into a dead comms channel. And he saw the civilian, the quiet woman they had all dismissed, her face illuminated by the glow of her console, working with a focus that was absolute. He saw the failure of authority and the quiet persistence of competence. He made a choice. He moved to her side, his own body braced against the lurching of the deck. "Doctor," he yelled over the din. "What do you need?" The question was a surrender and an offer. It was the moment authority began its migration from the man with the stars on his collar to the woman with the strange light in her eyes. Eris did not look up. Her gaze was locked onto a complex energy flow schematic she had just generated. "Control of the base's primary power grid," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with chilling clarity. "All of it. Reroute every available megawatt from non-essential systems to the deep earth seismic penetrators. Life support, emergency lighting, everything but this console." Reed stared at her. The seismic penetrators were research tools designed to send small, exploratory pulses deep into the Earth's crust. Using them would mean a total base-wide blackout. It was an insane, desperate gamble. It also felt like the only move left on the board. "You can't do that," Valerius bellowed, having overheard. "That's a violation of every emergency protocol. You will plunge us into darkness and kill us all." Eris finally turned her head and looked directly at the general. Her gray eyes were cold and hard as the granite that was trying to kill them. "We are already dead, General. We are just waiting for the ceiling to fall. Your protocols are irrelevant. The choice is a slow death in the light, or a chance at survival in the dark." There was no room for argument in her voice. It was a statement of fact, a clinical diagnosis of their situation. Reed looked from the general's sputtering rage to Eris's unwavering certainty. He trusted the data. He trusted the math. He made his decision. He turned to his own console, his fingers flying across the keys, bypassing the general's command authority with his own high-level access codes. "Engineering," he snapped into his mic. "You heard the doctor. Execute emergency power shunt directive Omega-7. Authorization Reed Alpha. Do it now." "Major, I will have you court-martialed for this," Valerius roared, taking a step toward him. "You'll have to survive first, sir," Reed shot back, not taking his eyes off his screen. "And right now, she is our only chance." The effect was immediate and terrifying. The main lights went out, succeeded by an even deeper, more profound darkness, as the emergency systems were systematically bled dry. The only light in the command center was the ghostly emerald glow of Eris's console. The groaning of the base seemed to intensify in the sudden pitch black, a beast roaring in the dark. The last dregs of power from the entire multi-billion-dollar facility began to pour into the 3 seismic penetrators, instruments of science about to be turned into a weapon. A new icon appeared on Eris's screen, a power gauge climbing rapidly into the red. Authority had not been seized. It had flowed like water to the only point of stability in the room. In the darkness, surrounded by the cacophony of their tomb, the crew of FOB Ethelgard turned their faces toward the one small light and the quiet woman who controlled it. She was in command now. The power gauge on her display filled, glowing a brilliant, angry white. The base's entire energy output, a colossal surge of captive lightning, was now hers to command. The air around her workstation crackled with electrostatic charge. The deep earth penetrators, designed for subtle inquiry, were now overloaded, transformed into a makeshift cannon whose barrel was the mountain itself. But she wasn't planning to fire a shot. Brute force was Valerius's way, a fool's gambit. Her solution was infinitely more elegant, more precise. She was not going to shout back at the mountain. She was going to sing its song back to it, but in a key of perfect destructive disharmony. Her mind was a silent tempest of calculation. The enemy was broadcasting on a pure 7.2 Hertz sine wave. To counter it, she couldn't simply blast raw energy into the rock. That would only add to the destructive chaos. She needed to create a perfect anti-wave, a signal with the exact same frequency and amplitude, but with a phase precisely 180 degrees out of sync. Where their wave crested, hers would trough. When they pushed, she would pull. The resulting interference pattern would not double the force, but cancel it out completely. It was the principle of noise cancellation headphones applied to a tectonic plate. It was a checkmate move in a game of physics. But the timing had to be perfect, down to the millisecond. She had to account for the signal propagation time through multiple layers of rock with varying densities. Granite, gneiss, quartz intrusions. A miscalculation of even a fraction of a second would turn her counterwave into a reinforcing wave, and the base would be pulverized into dust instantly. The lives of everyone in the bunker rested on her ability to perform a set of differential equations that would have taken a supercomputer an hour to solve. She had less than 10 seconds. The numbers flowed through her, not as abstract symbols, but as tangible things, as textures and tones. She could feel the shape of the enemy's wave, its rhythm, its pulse. Her fingers danced over the holographic interface, not typing commands, but conducting an orchestra of pure energy. She isolated the primary emitter source at the Cerberus complex, triangulating its position from the subtle phase delays in her sensor readings. She modeled the path her own counterpulse would take, a shimmering blue line lancing through the crimson lattice of the enemy's attack. "Phase lock in 3, 2, she murmured, her voice barely audible. The shaking of the base reached a terrifying crescendo. A heavy steel girder overhead tore free from its mounting with a shriek of tortured metal and slammed onto the deck just feet from the general, who scrambled back with a strangled cry. The end felt terrifyingly close. "Now," Eris whispered. Her finger tapped a single rune on the display. For one horrifying instant, the vibration intensified tenfold. It felt as if the mountain itself was being torn in two. A collective gasp went through the darkness of the command center as they were thrown violently against consoles and bulkheads. This was it, the final catastrophic failure. Then silence. It was not a gradual cessation of noise. It was instantaneous. One moment, the world was a roaring, grinding cataclysm. The next, there was nothing. The silence was absolute, profound, and more shocking than the violence that had preceded it. It was the silence of a vacuum, the stillness of the void. The vibrations were gone. The groaning of stressed metal was gone. The hum of the mountain was gone. All that remained was the sound of ragged, disbelieving breaths in the dark. On Eris's screen, the crimson lattice of the enemy's attack wave and her own shimmering blue counter wave had merged and vanished, annihilated in a perfect expression of destructive interference. Deep within the enemy's complex, the source emitter, having been hit with a feedback loop of its own energy perfectly reflected and amplified back upon itself, had shattered. The resonant cascade she had triggered had not only saved them, it had turned the enemy's weapon against itself. A flawless, intellectual victory. The threat was neutralized. For a long moment, nobody moved. They were suspended in the disorienting quiet, absorbing the reality of their survival. They had been at the edge of a cliff, and an invisible hand had not pulled them back, but had instead caused the cliff itself to cease to exist. Slowly, Major Reed found the manual override for the auxiliary lighting. A few low-wattage emergency bulbs flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the debris-strewn room. The scene was one of devastation. Consoles were overturned, walls were scarred with fresh cracks, and a thick layer of concrete dust coated every surface. But they were alive. In the center of it all, bathed in the soft light of her still glowing console, sat Eris Thorne. She hadn't moved. She was already analyzing the faint aftershocks, her expression as placid and unreadable as ever. She showed no sign of triumph, no relief. She had simply solved the problem. The emotional fallout was, to her, another extraneous data point. It was then that a new sound broke the stillness, a soft, electronic chime. It was coming from a small, hardened comms unit on the main command dais, a unit that had been stubbornly silent throughout the entire ordeal. A single green light blinked on its face. It was a deep-level, quantum-encrypted channel reserved for the highest echelons of strategic command. It was a link that bypassed conventional infrastructure entirely. General Valerius, his uniform covered in dust, his face pale with shock, stared at it as if it were an apparition. He stumbled towards it, fumbling to activate the receiver. A hiss of static, and then a face resolved on the small screen. It was a woman, her features sharp and severe, framed by dark hair threaded with silver. She wore the uniform of a 4-star general, but her insignia was one Valerius did not recognize, a black field with a single, stylized silver star. Her eyes, cold and piercing, swept the scene of devastation in the command center before locking onto one specific point. She did not address General Valerius. She did not ask for a situation report. Her gaze went past him, finding Eris at her workstation. "Report, Thorne," the woman said. Her voice was calm, clipped, and held an unmistakable tone of command that made Valerius's own parade ground boom sound like a child's shout. Valerius was stunned into silence. He looked from the screen to Eris and back again. "Thorne," he stammered, "who are you? How do you know this civilian?" The woman on the screen finally deigned to look at him. A flicker of something cold and dangerous passed through her eyes. "General Valerius," she said, her voice dropping a full octave. "The civilian you have been sidelining for the past month is the senior theoretical physicist for the asymmetric warfare group. Her name is Dr. Eris Thorne. To those of us who deal in real threats, however, She is known by her operational code name, Echo. She didn't just write the book on resonant geophysical warfare. She invented the language it was written in. The very seismic detection systems your team is using to monitor Cerberus are based on her third-generation designs. She is here under my direct authority on a mission you were not cleared to understand. You were not her commander, General. You were merely the caretaker of her laboratory. The weight of each word fell upon Valerius like a physical blow. The room, already silent, seemed to have the very air sucked out of it. The crew, frozen in place, stared at Eris, their expression shifting from confusion to shock, and finally to a profound, bottomless awe. The quiet egghead in the corner was not just a specialist. She was a legend they hadn't even known existed. Valerius's face went from pale to ashen. His mind reeled, trying to process the scale of his own ignorance, his own arrogance. He remembered his dismissive words, his condescension, his petty displays of power. He had been a child playing with tin soldiers in the presence of a grandmaster. The general on the screen, whose nameplate now resolved into focus as Rostova, was not finished. I see from the state of this room that the Cerberus asset has been dealt with. I assume, Thorn, that it was your signature work. Eris, for the first time, swiveled in her chair to face the comms unit. Their emitter array has been neutralized, she confirmed, her tone as factual as ever. I used a phase conjugate resonant feedback loop to overload their power core. The primary Cerberus facility is now tectonically unstable. I project a full structural collapse within the next 12 hours. Rostova nodded, a faint, grim smile touching her lips. Elegant, as always. Her gaze shifted back to Valerius, and all warmth vanished. General Valerius, your command of FOB Athelgard is hereby terminated. You will confine yourself to your quarters and await transport for a full performance review. Major Reed, you are in temporary command. Your first order is to give Echo anything she requires. Your second is to learn to listen to the people who know more than you do. Is that clear? Crystal, General, Reed managed, his voice hoarse. Valerius stood motionless, his world dismantled around him. His fall from power was as swift and absolute as the silence that had saved them. He looked down at his own hands, then over at Aris. His eyes fell upon her left wrist, which was now visible as she rested her hand on her console. There, inked in subtle gray against her pale skin, was a small, intricate tattoo he had never bothered to notice before. It wasn't a skull or a dagger. It was a thing of elegant, deadly geometry, a perfect sine wave representing a seismic pulse, being intersected and canceled by its inverted twin. Superimposed over it was a fine, parabolic arc, the unmistakable trajectory of a sniper's round calculated across an impossible distance. It wasn't a tattoo, it was a mission statement. It was the symbol for the lead strategist of a clandestine unit, so secret it was only referred to as Project Chimera. Her targets weren't men. They were ideologies, infrastructures, fault lines. Her bullets weren't lead. They were physics, data, and the fundamental forces of the universe. He finally understood. He hadn't been dealing with a geologist. He had been in the presence of one of the most sophisticated human weapons ever created, and he had told her to go play with her pebbles. The humiliation was a cold, heavy thing in his gut. He turned without another word and walked stiffly toward his quarters, his career ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, damning chime of a comms link. A new order settled over the command center in the wake of the general's departure. It was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. The tension was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of reverence. The crew moved with a newfound purpose, clearing debris and restoring systems, but their movements were careful, their voices low, as if they were in a holy place. Their eyes kept darting toward Eris, this unassuming woman who had tamed the very rock that formed their world. She, for her part, seemed utterly oblivious to the change. The revelation of her identity, the humbling of a general, the awe of the crew, none of it registered as important. The problem was solved. The data was collected. Now she was analyzing the aftermath, her focus as singular and intense as it had been during the crisis. She showed no pleasure in her victory, no satisfaction in Valerius's downfall. It was simply a rebalancing of the equation. Competence had asserted its natural dominance over hierarchy. Logic had prevailed. It was as it should be. Sometime later, as the main systems were slowly being brought back online, Major Reed approached her station. He moved quietly, respectfully. In his hand, he held a simple, steaming thermal mug. He placed it gently on the small, clear space on her console without a word. Eris glanced at the mug, then up at him. Her gray eyes held a flicker of something. Not surprise, but a quiet acknowledgement of the gesture. "The feedback cascade," Reed said, his voice low, almost a whisper. He wasn't praising her. He was trying to understand. "You didn't just block their signal. You inverted it and sent it back with their own carrier wave's energy signature. You made their weapon commit suicide. How did you calculate the phase shift in time?" Eris took a slow sip of the coffee. It was black, strong, just right. She looked at the data still scrolling on her screen, a complex tapestry of numbers that represented the final death throes of the Cerberus facility miles away. "They sang the wrong note," she said simply. "I just corrected the key." Reed nodded slowly, the immensity of her statement settling over him. For her, it was that simple, a matter of cosmic tuning. He had witnessed something that would be told in whispers for years, a story that would become a legend in the shadowy corners of the intelligence community. The day a quiet geologist taught a mountain to kill. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had just met the most dangerous person he would ever know. Her work here was done. 3 days later, a black, unmarked tilt-rotor aircraft descended upon Ethelgard, its engines making almost no sound. It settled on the landing pad like a phantom. Eris emerged from the bunker, dressed in the same anonymous black cargo pants and gray shirt. She carried a single data case. She offered no goodbyes, and no one dared to offer any to her. They simply watched as she boarded the craft, and it lifted away, vanishing into the gray mountain sky as silently as it had arrived. She left behind a humbled general, a newly enlightened major, and a crew that would forever look at the rock around them, not as inanimate stone, but as a potential weapon, a medium for a war they couldn't see. She had arrived as a whisper and departed as a ghost. Her only legacy, the profound, unshakable silence of the mountain she had mastered, and the legend of the quiet woman who listened to its heart, and for a single, terrifying moment had become its voice.